Welcome back, everybody. This is Kieran Singer here at Undead Storyteller. It's good to be back at work again, and today I've got some true ghost stories for you. These experiences all happened in Washington, D.C., and I can't wait to share them with you. I know you guys have been patiently waiting since my update regarding the future release of this video in the community feed, and that's been over a month ago now. Before we launch into these, however, I wanted to take a second to run through a couple of updates, as well as take that moment that every creator must shamelessly take to promote their other work. I'll go ahead and get said shameless promo out of the way by reminding everyone about and taking a moment to highlight the members exclusive series that I recently launched, an original work of mine titled Fall of a Dark Regime, Saga of the Truthbringer. To give a short summary, it is a dark romance featuring a strong female character who, to be honest, I still can't figure out if she falls into the anti-hero category. This work is gritty and gory, set in a dystopian reality where survival and resistance against an evil empire are central. If you're interested and are into that sort of fiction, please hop on over to memberships and join today. It's $4.99 a month, and you get multiple perks, including access to exclusive content like this epic series I've just mentioned, of which episodes 1 and 2 are now available, with the third on its way very soon, as well as special membership emojis and loyalty badges that let you stand out in the comments, and early access to all videos scheduled for release on the main channel. Now for the quick updates I talked about before I launched into all that other talk about memberships. I wanted to let you all know that there are 2 final compilations from what we'll call the classic content compilations, the original content from the channel's first 5 years. I'll keep you all updated on future compilations to be scheduled from new content as I get those prepared. The other update in regard to compilation videos pertains to ads, those pesky things we all despise, or at least I know I do, but unfortunately, the channel does need to utilize them to some degree at least in order to thrive and grow, so you all can keep enjoying the content here. That said, the way I typically do ads on my compilations is to place one at the beginning and one at the end, short and sweet, nice and simple. Not that it's changing a whole lot, but I am changing the way that it's set up for future compilation videos, and I just wanted to let you guys know about that really quickly. Instead of one at the beginning, one at the end, there will still be 2 ad placements, but both ads will be placed within the first hour of the video, as that's statistically on the analytics. That's when most of you guys are watching the most of the content, so that's when the ads will be placed. If that's too much of a problem for you, I'm sorry, but hey, that's just the way it's gonna be. Moving on. One final update disregarding merchandise promos and video intros. I'm going to start including product tags for you all in the future so that no one misses out on any chances for sales, limited time merchandise availabilities, or both. I hope that you all enjoy today's spooky stories, and if you do, make sure to hit like and subscribe and tap that notification bell to always get updated when new content is being released. And let me know your thoughts on these stories in the comment section. Now, without further ado, let's get into these Washington, D.C. ghost stories, and as always, don't forget to embrace the terror. This happened quite a few years ago when I lived in Washington, D.C. I had just moved into my friend's place, an old house near the city center. It had a basement where our band would practice, a ground floor with a living room and kitchen, and an upstairs with 3 bedrooms. The other 2 roommates my friend shared the place with were a couple. A few months after I moved in, the woman, Annie, announced her pregnancy, and we all celebrated. It was after that, however, that weird things began to happen. One of the first things was that both together and individually, we all started to think that we heard footsteps upstairs, as well as coming down the stairs. We lived near an area where there was a lot of crime and drug-related activity, and the city was going through a bad crime wave at the time as well, so there was the very real possibility of someone breaking into the house. But that was never the case. Over a period of several weeks, the footsteps event increased until they were a nightly occurrence. Then we started seeing a figure. This we all saw individually when we were alone, but we all had the same experience. It was what appeared to be a young woman in turn-of-the-century clothing. We saw her so many times that it almost became laughable in its predictability, and we never felt really scared. Until one night when Matt and I, the other roommate and partner of Annie, were out at another band practice. Annie called us in a panic. She was at home alone, and she said that it sounded as if someone was throwing things around. She thought that someone really had broken in that time, and she called the police. We raced through the whole 45-minute drive back home. The police came. They found nothing. Everything was fine downstairs, and no windows or doors were ajar or showed signs of having been tampered with. We all thought of the ghostly experiences we'd been having, and how this seemed to be a definite escalation. The sounds of walking, seeing a strange figure, and the noises in the basement all continued. Soon, though, we all noticed that Annie was having more individual experiences than the rest of us. Another thing that happened was that once, when Annie and Matt were in bed, they both saw a red ball of light fly from one corner of the room to the other. It terrified them both. I wasn't at home at the time when that happened, but they told me about it later. As a side note here, I don't know if this played a role or not, but Matt and I are both atheists, very skeptical. Annie, on the other hand, grew up in the South. She was very superstitious, very spiritual, though not religious. Everything slowly kept ramping up. More and more activity was going on. Annie discovered that she was having twins, but that unfortunately they were both weak and small, and would most likely be born very prematurely. Her newfound knowledge added a layer of anxiety and sadness to the atmosphere in the house. Not long after she was given the bad news, she had the idea to go and visit a so-called psychic. At the time, I was very anti, and so was Matt, and neither of us really wanted to go, but we all did. She told us that the ghosts were spirits who weren't sure if they wanted to come into this world again. She believed in reincarnation. I didn't pay attention to any of it, because like I said, I just wasn't a believer in that kind of thing. Although the strangeness of the haunting stuff was beginning to get to me a little. Then I had my own worst personal experience. Annie and Matt were gone for the night to stay at Matt's parents' house. I was there alone. It was close to sundown when the noise of things being thrown around kicked off in the basement. Then the power went out. I called some friends who lived a few blocks away and asked if I could come over. They said sure, so I did. I walked up the 4 flights of stairs to their apartment, and I kid you not, as they opened the door, their power went out, and 2 large paintings hanging on their wall fell. I never would have believed it had I not been there. I started going into complete panic mode, thinking whatever this was had followed me. I asked if I could spend the night anyway. Nothing else happened until a little after 2 a.m. when we could all hear someone walking back and forth down the street, whistling. As I mentioned before, there are plenty of addicts and criminals in the area, so it could have been someone like that. But when we looked out the window, we could see no one. We were all incredibly scared. Things like that kept happening at the house too, and then, one night, Annie had to be rushed to the hospital. After a very dangerous few hours where losing the babies was a possibility, she gave birth. The twins weren't healthy and had to stay in the hospital for 3 months, if I remember correctly. When they finally got to come home, each had an oxygen tank, and they were sickly for their first year. But after they were born, all of the weird, ghostly events stopped. Everything. I've only had a handful of things happen to me in my life that I would describe as unusual. I'm still extremely skeptical toward a great many things, but this I was never able to explain away. When I was getting my master's degree, I moved to the big city of Washington, D.C. from rural New Mexico. For most of my time in D.C., I lived on campus, but for my last semester, a friend of mine received his first full-time appointment. An appointment is basically a pastorate, and it comes with a parsonage or a house for the clergy to live in. At the time, he was a single guy, and his parsonage was a big house. He decided to rent me a room to help me save a little money so that I could be ready to move for my first appointment next July. I agreed and moved into his guest room. It was a 50s era house from what I could tell. It had been well taken care of. On the ground floor, there was a half bath, kitchen, living room, and a small office. There was a basement, and on the second floor, there were 3 bedrooms. My friend had the main bedroom, which included its own half bath. Next door to his room was the one full bathroom. Across from his room was my room, and next door to me was the guest bedroom. Each of these bedrooms had an access point to the attic, though none of them were connected by it. It always creeped me out. I'd hear weird noises from time to time, but nothing that I couldn't explain away. One night, I was lying in bed watching Breaking Bad, trying to fall asleep after writing a difficult theology paper. The only light in the room was coming from the TV, and from the moon as it streamed in through the window. In the shadows, I could have sworn that I saw something pounce from over by the door to the attic, toward me. It could have been my imagination. Perhaps I dozed off and it was some kind of nightmare. Or maybe it had been some kind of entity. Whatever it was, it freaked me out. I barely slept at all that night, and I turned my lights on. The next day, I rearranged the room. I placed the TV stand in front of the little door, blocked it, and lined my collection of Orthodox icons on top of the stand. I didn't live there much longer, but after that, the rest of my time seemed more peaceful. In the winter of 2015, I was honorably discharged from the United States Army after serving one tour in Afghanistan as a turret gunner on a security forces mission. I spent 5 years in the Army and obtained the prestige of being an infantry parachutist, most commonly referred to as a paratrooper. I spent my last 2 years in the Army, stationed at Fort Belvoir, located in Alexandria in Fairfax County. There, I went through the medical separation process because of post-traumatic stress disorder set on by my 2012 deployment in eastern Afghanistan. Fort Belvoir is home to one of the military's finest hospital and healthcare detachments. It was during this time that I started to get acquainted with the Washington, D.C. metro area. During the summer of 2014, I went home to visit my family in Rhode Island for my 21st birthday. Since I was still active duty, it was necessary to fill out a DA-31 form to request authority to take leave. Form in hand, I traveled back home with the intention of staying gone for 2 weeks. As I was on my way, however, I was robbed at gunpoint and set up by 3 individuals who knew that I was carrying cash on my person. I was shot once in the upper leg, shattering my femur and causing me to lose over 3 liters of blood. If the bullet had been a centimeter off, it would have severed the femoral artery, and I wouldn't be around to write this. After emergency surgery at a Rhode Island hospital, I was transferred back to my unit at Belvoir. I had to do intensive physical therapy to regain the use of my leg. With such a traumatic injury, I was left crippled and had to learn how to walk again. I spent months in a wheelchair, then weeks using a walker and a cane. Come January of 2015, I was discharged, and civilian life began. I didn't want to move back home to Rhode Island, so I decided to find an affordable apartment there in DC. For those who don't know the layout of DC, it is separated into 4 quadrants resembling the shape of a diamond. You have northwest, southwest, northeast, and southeast. Both the northeast and the southeast sections of the city have an infamous reputation for having crime-ridden, drug-infested neighborhoods. But because it suited my economic interests at the time, since I was living on a modest budget, I decided to move into a rundown apartment in the northeast quadrant right on the county line. The first month there was uneventful. Nothing felt strange or amiss. I never got any bad feelings. There were never any off vibes. There was a bus station at the bottom of my street that ran directly to the Minnesota Avenue metro station. It was quite convenient. The first incident to occur was with my kitchen cabinets. After waking up early and walking into the kitchen, I noticed all the cabinet doors were wide open. I knew with certainty that they were all closed when I had gone to bed. I like to keep things orderly in my house. I'm one to scrutinize. I have a great capacity for attention to detail. Still, though, I convinced myself that I wasn't 100% positive, and that the only logical explanation could be me having left them open by accident, that I simply forgot. A few weeks later, I started dating a woman from Washington, D.C. who lived nearby. She was older than me and had 3 children, 2 of whom were girls who lived with her and would frequently visit my residence. After a few visits, the girls began telling their mother and myself that they got creepy, uncomfortable vibes from my apartment. Vibes that included the feeling of being watched or overall dread. Even their mother expressed those same feelings to me on occasion. That's when the electronics around the house started to malfunction. My Xbox would turn on and off on its own. My TV would turn on, blaring music on the highest setting while I was in bed. Once again, I was being a skeptic. I pushed aside the mishaps, contributing them to what was probably faulty wiring in the apartment building. But one day, that would change. I remember coming home late one night after a long work day and spending time with my girlfriend at her apartment. I was especially tired that night and hopped into the shower after eating some leftovers. Then I lay down on the couch to watch TV until my eyes began to close. I decided it was time to move into the bedroom and get some proper rest. Aside from a stream of light coming from the street lamp outside my window from the city sidewalk, my room was pitch black. I remember laying there, tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, when suddenly a black mass began to form in my doorway. I attempted to grab my sidearm from where it was resting on my nightstand, but I couldn't bring myself to lift my hand or to turn away. I was frozen, primordial fear completely overwhelming me. The figures concentrated a deep gaze in my direction, and it seemed that they were almost communicating with each other, plotting evil deeds, no doubt. Then the tallest one, the one that I can only describe as having been the leader, levitated across the room and stopped directly in front of my face. The entity was a thick, black mass with the shape and outline of a human who stood over 6 feet tall. It wasn't that the figure was just black, either. It was as if it were the absence of light. It wasn't transparent. It placed its pitch-black face against mine and made a hissing sound that I will never forget. Never have I encountered something so real and so terrifying. After it made that horrid noise, it levitated back toward the other figures. I can only speculate this, but I suspect that they were feeding on the essence of my fear. Fear that I knew was radiating from my every pore. And then, satisfied, they turned around and left my room in single file. It was at that exact moment that I was able to move and finally grab a hold of my sidearm. I went from room to room, clearing each corner as I had been trained to do in the army. I truly believed, or perhaps in retrospect simply wanted to, that these entities were human intruders. The situation had me so shaken. I had never been physically paralyzed like that before by fear, and never have been since. I ended up moving back home to Rhode Island shortly after the incident. Nothing like that, nothing paranormal in general, has happened to me again. A few times I've tried to make sense of the ordeal. I've done research on sleep paralysis and shadow people. The reason I don't believe it was a simple case of sleep paralysis or a dreamlike hallucination produced by my own brain is because I hadn't fallen asleep prior to the intrusion. My paralysis had been caused by fear, and fear alone.